but feeling cooler elsewhere. A dry end to the day also in Northern Ireland with hazy sunshine. Winds will be light with temperatures in the high teens. Staying warm for many places tonight ahead of a very hot day on Monday. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently. Don't
miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good afternoon, it's just gone 6 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Train companies are advising people not to travel over the next 2 days as forecasters predict extreme temperatures. Avanti West Coast has updated its advice to travel only if absolutely necessary, whilst London North Eastern Railway is urging people not to travel at all on Tuesday. The Health Secretary has said extra measures are being put in place for ambulances, with an amber extreme heat warning in for most of Britain today and the first red alert for tomorrow and Tuesday, covering a large part of England with temperatures predicted to reach 40 degrees Celsius. Record-breaking heat in Europe has sparked deadly wildfires across the continent. High temperatures and strong winds are fueling the flames. At least 90,000 acres have burned in Portugal, most of them in the past week, but they're contained for now. Thousands of people are also being evacuated in France, Italy, Croatia, Greece and Spain. The French Environment Junior Minister says similar conditions have been felt all summer.
It's an especially difficult summer. We are dealing with very considerable drought due to insufficient rainfalls over the winter and spring, an especially dry month of May, and now we have particularly high temperatures, as you can currently feel.
The cabinet minister who led last year's UN climate change summit says he could resign if the next prime minister is not fully committed to the net zero agenda. COP26 President Alok Sharma told the Observer newspaper that some of the remaining candidates in the Tory leadership race had been what he called lukewarm on the emissions target. He urged them to set out their support for net zero and green growth. The second televised leadership debate will take place later tonight. A mother has paid tribute to her 3-year-old boy who died after being struck by a tractor in Greater Manchester. Albie Speakman suffered fatal injuries following the incident on a farm in Bury yesterday. His mother, Leah, said her son was incredibly loving, affectionate and caring. A man found dead in an Italian hotel room has been named as the former professional rugby player Ricky Bilbili. He was discovered yesterday morning next to a seriously hurt 43-year-old woman thought to be his partner. She's being treated in hospital while police in the city of Florence continue their investigations. Bibby's former clubs included Wigan and St Helens, and they've paid tribute to him. The government has announced all schools in England will have a defibrillator by the end of the next academic year. State-funded schools will be reviewed to see how many devices are needed. The number is thought to be estimated at more than 20,000. Research shows accessing a defibrillator within 3 to 5 minutes of a cardiac arrest does increase the chance of survival by over 40%. First deliveries are expected by Christmas. Around 1.3 million families across the UK are thought to be facing the cost of living crisis with no savings. New research has found in the period leading up to the pandemic, nearly half of families across Britain had less than a month's income stashed away. The Resolution Foundation says while some will rely on friends or family to bail them out, some people believe they'll simply be unable to cope. And the Queen and Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have been wishing Camilla a very happy 75th birthday. William and Kate shared photos with birthday tributes on Twitter, along with Buckingham Palace, who also released an official photograph of the Duchess of Cornwall to mark the occasion. It shows Camilla sitting smiling at a garden table. The picture was taken last month in the gardens of Camilla's retreat in Wiltshire. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We'll have much more news at the top of the next hour. Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry for most of us, and it should stay warm in the late evening sunshine. Let's take a look at the details. It's a dry end to the day in southwest England with plenty of sunshine. It will be slightly breezier around the coast, but feeling warm inland. Southeast England will hold on to plenty of sunshine this evening. It will feel warm late into the evening with light winds, staying dry also into Wales to end the day with lots of very late sunshine, a thin layer of cloud that will turn the sunshine hazy at times. A fine end to the day across the Midlands with light winds and evening sunshine. It will feel rather warm this evening with temperatures in the mid-20s. Skies will be a little cloudier though in northern England, although there will be some sunny breaks at times. Staying warm this evening but feeling fresher on the coast. Largely cloudy to end the day in Scotland with some patchy rain in the far north. Warmer weather will hang on in the south tonight, but feeling cooler elsewhere. A dry end to the day also in Northern Ireland with hazy sunshine. Winds will be light with temperatures in the high teens. Staying warm for many places tonight ahead of a very hot day on Monday. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Gina Davison, and today I'm joined here in the studio by our very own Paul Embry. And in Northern Ireland by the birthday girl herself, Arlene Foster. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. As you know, this is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we will be discussing the Conservative leadership race following the first televised debate on Friday night, as the process reaches a crucial phase. A national emergency has been declared after a red extreme heat warning was issued for the first time. But the sun is also bringing heat to our discourse, with many on social media clashing over how the weather is currently being reported. And we'll also be talking about mental health in schools after the Baroness Fox of Buckley made a statement in the House of Lords, urging teachers to focus less on mental health and more on reassuring young people about the challenges they face. And as ever, here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved in the conversation and have your message read out on the show, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. This is The Political Correction. The Conservative leadership race is approaching a crucial phase as the candidates gear up for another televised debate this evening, ahead of the shortlist being whittled down to just 2 candidates. In the first debate, which took place on Friday, the 5 remaining hopefuls clashed over tax, trans issues and the NHS. So, Paul, I know that you're an avid watcher of Conservative debate, so what did you make of the first one on Friday?
Oh, the bitterness and the vitriol, Deanna, it's fantastic for those of us on the other side of politics. Let them tear each other apart, I say. No, look, I mean, I think these debates often generate more heat than light, to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of these debates, but, I mean, what I do find interesting is how all of the Tory candidates seem to be trying to almost out-Thatcher each other at the moment, probably to appeal to the wider membership. You know, they're going for this agenda of low tax, low regulation, economy, rolling back the frontiers of the state and so on. And it's pretty clear that a number of candidates are now basing their campaign on that sort of agenda. I just think, actually, there's a danger for any candidate who wants to follow that particular agenda, because you need to remember that in 2019, you won constituencies like your own, Deanna, you know, red wall constituencies such as Bishop Auckland, where that kind of traditional Thatcherite, low tax, low regulation, get the state out of your lives, you know, everybody, every man for himself, every woman for herself kind of thing, I don't think is necessarily well received. It's not necessarily that agenda commensurate with those sorts of areas usually. And I think people in those constituencies, if they're going to continue voting Tory, and I hope they don't obviously, but if they are, I think they're going to be wanting something different. I think they're going to be thinking, you know, what can, not an overbearing state, but a protective state that can actually intervene in their lives and communities for the better, particularly during a cost of living crisis, particularly when, you know, some of them are struggling to get their foot on the housing ladder and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, it's interesting the direction that the debate has taken inside the Tory party. But overall, as a spectacle, I don't think any candidate was particularly benefited by the debate, and I don't think any candidate was particularly disadvantaged. That's my overall view.
And Arlene, what about you? What did you make of it?
Well, I think probably Rishi Sunak came out the best, and I'm not a supporter of Rishi Sunak, but I think he showed his gravitas during the debate. I just want to pick up on the point, though, that Paul makes about people being likened to Margaret Thatcher, because there's a piece by Bill Cash today in the Telegraph likening, I think it's Liz Truss to Thatcher. So there's almost this base now that everybody has to be who's most like Thatcher. And I think that that's probably wrong. I think, like Paul, people should be speaking up for their own policies and their own agenda. I'm sure when Margaret Thatcher was putting herself forward, she wasn't likened to anybody else. She was just herself and brought forward her own policies and objectives, and that's why she was the person she became as a leader that stayed in power for a considerable length of time. So I think it is a mistake to try and liken candidates to one or the other, but clearly it appeals to the Conservative membership if they think they're going to get another Thatcher because she was such a vote winner. And I have to say the person who I think is the most interesting of all is Kemi Badenoch. I think she is bringing forward new, fresh ideas. Of course, she hasn't been in a serious government position, and that goes against her. But you know what? If we're going back to the Thatcher likeness again, she only held the Minister of Education, which at that time was seen to be a woman's portfolio, as you know. women weren't put into high-level portfolios, and she came forward and she became the Prime Minister. So I think Kemi's coming forward with some very interesting, new, fresh ideas, and she does have the advantage of not having been in the government to date. Because when I listened to Rishi Sunak, and today he's talking about how he's going to have a bonfire of EU regulations. Well, sorry, you've been Chancellor for a considerable period of time. Why is this only coming out now? Why are you only deciding to do this now when you could have been at the forefront of doing that before now? So it'll be an interesting debate later on this evening. But as you know well, Deanna, a lot of these debates are not about the content of the debate, but how people react, how they present themselves in these debates, how they cope with challenge. So it's as much about all of that as it is about the content of what they have to say.
Well, let's talk about challenge, because there were a few fiery moments, weren't there, in Friday's debate, particularly between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, and then Kemi Badenoch and Penny Mordaunt. Do you expect this evening that candidates will come out swinging even more, Arlene?
Yeah, I think they will, because they want to prove that they're tough. They want to prove that they're capable of leading, of course, not just the Conservative Party, but the country as Prime Minister. And we shouldn't forget that this leadership race isn't just about being Conservative leader, but also about being the Prime Minister of the country. So it is important that we hear from them what they see as their vision for the United Kingdom moving forward. And of course, you would expect me to say this, wouldn't you? I'll be wanting to hear what they have to say about the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I know we're going to talk about that later on, so I'll not go into detail about that now. But there's a whole range of issues, and to be fair, they have tackled them today in some of their opinion pieces, from housing to tax to regulation to immigration. And there's a lot of content there that we could discuss. And of course, I'm sure that Penny Mordaunt will continue to be challenged on her views around trans men, trans women, and whether they are women and men, because that seems to come back time and time again at Penny Mordaunt.
Yeah. Paul, there's something I want to ask you about, and that's about the kind of diversity of the candidates, because we in the Conservative Party see ourselves as a party of meritocrats, where it's simply the brightest and best that kind of get to the top, and we've got a very diverse range of candidates who are in the sort of initial 8 who put themselves forward. The Labour Party talks a really good game on diversity, and yet looking at kind of past candidates, it hasn't really kind of proven that it can do it, has it?
No, and credit where it's due. I mean, the Conservative Party has come on leaps and bounds in terms of representing a broader kind of spectrum over recent years. I remember John Taylor, a black Conservative candidate for Cheltenham, I think it was in the 90s, who received the most actually horrendous abuse, racist abuse, including from people within that constituency Conservative Association, when he was selected as the candidate, and that was 30 years ago. So yeah, and I think David Cameron, to be fair, credit where it's due, David Cameron tried to widen the appeal of the Conservative Party when he was the leader, in terms of having a kind of broader breadth of candidate. And I think some of that is probably bearing fruit. But at the same time, I don't think we should get too hung up on these things. I'm a great believer in, if you're the best person for the job, then frankly, irrespective of whether you're black or white or Asian or a man or a woman, I think, yes, we have to adhere to the principle that there should be no barriers to people advancing in politics or any other field of life because of their background, because of their biological characteristics. But beyond that, it's really important, I think, that we have the best person for the job in this sort of situation. There's a danger that you slip into tokenism. For example, I'm completely opposed to all women shortlists, which is something that the Labour Party have pushed for years and years, because that, I think, does slip into tokenism, and that's where I think people should say, no, that's not acceptable. I know a lot of women, in fact, who are against all women shortlists. So what might be interesting, and this is probably one for you, Deanna, I mean, obviously, all of these candidates are in place. And they do come from a very kind of diverse background. And I think you can see from the votes so far within the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there's, none of their backgrounds or biological characteristics represent any sort of barrier for them. Obviously, the final two then have to go to the Conservative Party membership. Do you think the Conservative Party membership would approach it in the same open-minded way, or do you think there may still be some of the problems that the Conservative Party suffered from in the past?
I think they'd approach it in exactly the same way because, you know, as I said, I'm very proud to be a Conservative because we are meritocrats. We think it should be the best person for the job. And best person for the job in this case is kind of double-pronged, isn't it? It's who's going to be the best Prime Minister and do right by the country. But obviously, we're a political party. It's also who's going to give us the best chance of winning at the next general election. I think that's what's going to be at the forefront of Conservative members' minds, and they'll approach it very much in that way. But as you know, Paul, when it gets down to the final two, the two candidates will be touring all over the country, doing hustings with Conservative members and trying to set out their stall and prove why they're the best candidate. I think their performance at those hustings will be quite a large factor, actually, in how people vote. That is assuming people haven't decided already based on the ideas that have been coming out and based on performances at TV debates, but also experience and performance in the House of Commons chamber as well. It's going to be fascinating anyway.
It's going to be fascinating. I mean, my advice, not that I suspect any Conservative is going to take my advice, but I do think it's important to, in these sort of leadership elections, we've had them in the Labour Party as well, to concentrate on hard policy. I think it's very tempting sometimes when there's bitterness between individual camps and they're briefing against each other. It's very easy to slip into a very kind of insular perspective and just to get bogged down in the internal bitterness. Actually, that's not what the country out there is interested in. They're interested in hard policy. They're thinking, how are you going to overcome this cost of living crisis? How are you going to reduce the gap between rich and poor? How are you going to deal with the millions of people in insecure employment, with the wealth and income inequality inside the country at the moment? Those are the answers. Well, those are the questions, rather, that people out there in the country will be seeking answers to. So, you know, any Conservative who thinks they're going to attract a wider layer of people simply by getting bogged down in the internal bitterness and infighting, I think would get a rude awakening.
I think that's exactly right. So I'm going to come to you two for predictions of who you think will be in the final two come Wednesday. Arlene, you first.
Well, I think Rishi's going to be in the final two. And then it becomes a little bit more difficult because we've seen the numbers move about. I'm going to stick my neck out and say Kemi. I hope it's going to be Kemi because I think that would be a really interesting battle. That's what my heart said. My head says it'll probably more likely be Liz or Penny. So I'm really hedging my bet.
You are hedging your bet slightly there, Ollie. Never mind. We'll allow it. We'll allow it. Paul?
I suspect it'll be Sunak and Mordaunt in the final two. I'm really disappointed Michael Fabricant didn't run Vienna. Britain needs a PM with a toupee. We've never had a PM with a toupee. It's about time. And you could have done us a big favour inside the Labour Party if you'd nominated Fabricant.
Well, next time, Paul, we'll get you in and you can run his campaign. How about that?
I don't know about that.
Well, we're delighted to say that joining us now live from Westminster is the GB News political editor, Darren McCaffrey. So, Darren, we've got the next big debate this evening. What is the mood over there in Westminster?
Michael Fabricant for PM, that would be quite a moment, wouldn't it? Yes, the mood here in Westminster is very much focused on those debates, or that debate on ITV tonight with the 5 remaining candidates. It's going to be fascinating to see whether any of them take a slightly different change of strategy that we saw from Friday night. There was a sense maybe that Liz Truss needs to be a bit less still sit, a little bit less wooden, maybe a bit more charismatic. I don't know how you feel about that, Diana. But also whether, frankly, Penny Mordaunt played it too safe and again needs to be a bit punchier. There was that sense that looking at the list of questions that may have played into Rishi Sunak's hands. Clearly the economy and taxation dominated. As a former Chancellor, he's pretty much across the detail. Could there be a different selection of questions tonight, whether they be on Brexit or migration, etc.? So it will really be fascinating, and clearly the candidates today will be focusing an awful lot on that debate preparation. In saying that, we've seen a whole range of supporters out this morning on the TV channels and on the radio trying to defend and put forwards their candidate stall. Penny Mordaunt's in the last couple of minutes suggesting that she wants to see modest tax cuts and that what some candidates are proposing is simply not responsible. We heard that also from Dominic Raab, essentially attacking Liz Truss, saying that she had not cut taxes when she was in the Treasury as Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Theresa May, and to judge people on their record. He, of course, is backing Rishi Sunak. In the end, though, you know, this is quite it's quite interesting, clearly, for all of us. The question is it quite damaging for the Conservative Party? Yes, they're having a proper battle of ideas. Clearly, this is really important, given the fact that whoever takes over as Conservative leader in the next couple of months will become Prime Minister. And it is also clear during a cost of living crisis, there will have to be quite a significant economic change, if you like, or indeed an attempt to try and redress that cost of living crisis, particularly when it comes to fuel, energy prices. But also, there is an awful lot of personal tax. Now, that's part of the rough and tumble of politics, but it does give the impression that the Conservative Party at the moment is pretty divided. Does the electorate out there, do the ordinary British voters like a party that's divided? I'm not entirely sure they do.
Brilliant. Well, Darren, thank you for that rundown and for your insights there. Darren McCaffrey, our very own GB News political editor.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to the Political Correction this morning. And as ever, loads of you getting in touch with your views on the Conservative leadership race. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, we've got Alan who says the Conservative Party needs a proper Tory. We tried a Remainer with Mrs May, who said Brexit meant Brexit, but all she did was try and keep us tied to the EU. We need a full-time Kemi, not a part-time Penny.
Ooh,
very clever.
Arlene, what have you got for us?
Saying that TV debates are a complete waste of time. Mainstream media ruin any proper debate. Ditch them. I have to say I agree with Dave, because at the end of the day, at the moment, the people who are making the decisions are the MPs. And do they really need television debates to make up their minds? I'm not sure that they do.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, there's certainly been a lot of kind of hustings going on for the actual electorate, for those Tory MPs at the moment. But I don't know, on the one hand, I guess the TV debates are a good way to test out candidates, make sure they've kind of properly been blooded in, make sure they can perform well under scrutiny. And as MPs, clearly that's something that we are concerned about. But I'm not sure how many people's mind they actually change, because as MPs, we can be quite stubborn once we've made a decision.
Well, a good example of that, Deanna, was in, I think it was 2010, which was the first TV debates of potential prime ministers in this country during the general election. And Nick Clegg, who was the leader of the Lib Dems at the time, I think there were maybe 3 debates, and the first one he performed particularly well. And the next day, polling was taken, which saw a surge in Lib Dem support directly as a result of that. And come the actual election, they didn't really improve upon their past performance. So it can maybe, create a momentary improvement in fortunes, but in terms of anything long term, I don't think they really make a huge impact personally.
Yeah, agreed. So what else have we got? We've got Andrew here saying, on the current debate, the trouble is the nanny state becomes overbearing. Once the interfering in our lives starts, it expands and expands and expands. Paul?
Yeah, Pauline says the country needs to be brave and take a leap of faith for change. We lacked the courage at the last election to get fully behind the Brexit party. The two-party system is no longer fit for purpose. The last few years, it's felt like a one-party state as it's difficult to differentiate between Tory and Labour. If we don't pay attention to the nefarious global elites and their influence on global politics, humanity deserves all that is hurtling towards us. Pretty powerful point from Pauline.
Interesting. And one there for you, a cheeky one here from John Taylor. In response to Paul effectively endorsing Michael Fabricant for Tory leader, saying Michael Fabricant has a toupee, really? Well, we'll get more of your views read out later in the show, so do keep them coming in on GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews. Now, a national emergency has been declared after a red extreme heat warning was issued for the first time, as temperatures in Britain could hit 40 degrees. The Met Office's highest warning covers an area including London, Manchester and York on Monday and Tuesday. And it means there is a risk to life and daily routines will need to change. But the upcoming heat has become somewhat of a contentious issue, particularly on social media, with some saying the increase in temperature is an obvious sign of a warming planet, and others saying we should just enjoy the sun in peace. Paul, why do you think the rhetoric around the weather is heating people up so much?
I just think it's the nature of our times at the moment, Deanna. I think we're into a bit of a culture of ultra-safetyism. I think we saw during the pandemic what that meant in terms of extreme restrictions, the state entering areas of people's lives which it would never previously have entered, attacking people's freedoms and personal liberties in a way that, I don't think we would ever previously have dreamt of. So I think it's a mindset now where some people think if there's the slightest threat, then the state automatically has to become involved and take complete charge of the situation. And I'm uncomfortable with that. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I'm not against government giving warnings. I think it's fairly reasonable for the government to say, don't forget to keep yourself hydrated. For example, don't lock your dogs in hot cars, make sure you leave windows open and so on. I don't particularly object to that. But when it comes to things like, schools have already been closed in advance of Tuesday, I think, which is going to be the hottest day. Fun runs this weekend, I know in my local area have been cancelled. And I think that is just taking things to an extreme degree. Life is full of risks, and yes, it's sensible sometimes to mitigate those risks, but you can't eliminate them. And if you do, you're going to live in a society that becomes actually quite oppressive.
The thing I don't understand about the school closures as well is it's not as though we live in a society where you're going to be sending kids home to nice air-conditioned homes or flats. I just find it a little bit baffling, and given the few years that kids have had with education, can't say I'm particularly supportive.
And it's not easy. Sorry, Jen, I was going to say, it's not easy for parents to be told at late notice.
Quite right.
These parents are often working themselves, and they've been told, well, the primary school's closing, so they've got to make last-minute arrangements for their kids, which may mean them not being able to go into work and earn money. So all these sorts of implications that I don't think are often thought about very much.
Yeah, Arlene, I've seen you nodding away there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think common sense has just gone out the window, unfortunately, for people. I did read a headline on the BBC website which said, to avoid death, keep safe. Yeah, well, I think we're aware of that. But, I find it amazing that schools are closing when it's hot. Schools will probably close when we have snow and freezing. One wonders when schools are going to be open in the future, and that is a real concern because we know the damage that closing schools did during the COVID pandemic. There were a lot of unseen harms at that time, particularly for vulnerable children who were sent home to unsafe areas. And I just think it's mad. There are a lot of kids who, if they're sent home, they'll be running around, they'll not actually be inside, they won't be safe, and they'd be much safer at school. So I just think it's wrong that people have taken the decision to close schools. I think kids would be much better at school and safer at school. And I just think that, whilst we love to talk about the weather, we're British after all, it's, one of the things that we talk about all of the time. This is just taking it to a ridiculous level, and we all need to calm down, be sensible, be safe, take precautions, and not get so excited about weather coming. It used to be the case that when there was good weather coming, we'd all look forward to it. Now people, I was visiting an elderly relative yesterday, and he was saying, oh, people are going to die, Arlene, because of this heat. He was actually quite anxious about it. And I think it's wrong to make people anxious. Of course, you should take the precautions, but you shouldn't get to a level that it leads to anxiety. And I think we really need to take a good hard look at ourselves around all of this.
If we're going to see hotter temperatures more regularly in the future, do we need to be doing more in terms of investing in infrastructure? Having different makeups of the asphalt in our roads to protect them against heat? Do we need to be putting in place extra protections for our rail lines? Because these are things that people are genuinely concerned about over the next few days, that trains may not be able to operate, that road surfaces may actually start melting. Arlene, it'd be a big infrastructure project, but do you think this is something government need to seriously consider?
Yeah, this is something that we should be considering, and this is what government should be thinking about rather than thinking about the things that we've been talking about. Because when you go to a country like Canada, for example, that has a lot of snow and very cold temperatures during the wintertime, they have taken proactive measures around their infrastructure to make sure that their cities and in fact, the whole country works during those periods of really low temperatures. And I think we need to think about our infrastructure and whether it's fit for purpose, whether our transport system is fit for purpose in these extreme weather conditions, because as well as high heats in the summer, we're probably going to see very cold winters as well.
Well, so we've got time for there, but send us your views. What have you made of the kind of rhetoric around the heatwave? Are you looking forward to it? What are you planning? Or are you concerned? Do you think that the government's taking the right approach in putting out these warnings and giving people advice? Send us your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, speaking this week in the House of Lords, the Baroness Fox of Buckley, Claire Fox, said there is a danger that if adults in schools continue to focus on mental health, young people will grow up with a skewed view of the challenges that they face. She argued that schools, rather than focusing so much on mental health, should aim to reassure young people about those challenges, and said she's concerned that we are in danger of pathologising children. Well, we're delighted to say that Baroness Claire joins us now. Claire, thank you for your time this morning. Tell us a little bit about what you said in the Chamber earlier this week.
Well, actually, it relates to the conversation you've just been having, because I heard Arlene talking about the fear injected into older people about the weather. And actually, if you look at practically every social and political issue as discussed in schools, it ends up creating anxiety and is seen through the prism of mental health. But my concern was an amendment being put forward to the schools bill, which was effectively arguing that mental health should be the cornerstone of schooling, that there should be Ofsted inspections of mental health provision. And I was worried, and am worried, and have been for some years, that the trials and tribulations of growing up, all those kind of fears about my friends don't like me, puberty, it's awkward being 14, 15, 16, isn't it? And if an adult way of discussing this is through the language of mental health, you end up with primary school kids going around saying, I'm suffering trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, because I've got tests coming up. They're using the language of anxiety and mental health discourse. And the irony is that where you have real problems of mental illness in the young, and of course there are some young people who get mental illness, that gets relativized in with people who are just having every single anxiety of growing up pathologized and medicalized. Mm-hmm. So that was my concern. And by the way, massive increase in the use of drugs, effectively, Valium, in young people, including primary school teachers, at the moment and subsequent to the lockdown measures.
It's one that I find really difficult, Claire, because I'm very kind of pro discussing mental health. I think people should be free to come forward and talk about the struggles they face. But I'm with you, certainly when it comes to medicating. I remember myself going for an appointment. I wasn't at school, I was just out of it. Spoke to the doctor for about 2 minutes saying, I'm feeling really down, I'm not really sure what to do. I had a prescription for antidepressants in my hand within about 2 minutes just to quickly get me out the door. And I think we need definitely a different approach to that, particularly with children, because the long-term effects of antidepressants can be quite troubling, as well as the side effects too. Paul, sorry, Claire, back to you.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, I want to stress, I worked for Mind when many years ago, I've worked in the mental health profession. So I'm not suggesting that mental health is not an important issue. What I'm talking about is the therapeutic language that's basically come into schools to describe everything. And I do think that we have got a problem when we see, young people have to learn to become resilient and deal with the difficulties that life will throw at them. And if you are in a situation where, for example, you fall out with your friends and, you have some big dispute and you end up going to a counsellor and saying, my mental health is affected, and this is affirmed by the schools, and in fact, the schools are incentivised to indicate what they're doing for the mental health of their pupils, then everything gets seen through that way, rather than saying, actually, this is what life's like and it's fine, you won't get on with everyone, you'll get over it, and so on and so forth. Because I think it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you effectively tell young people they can't cope, that their mental health is constantly under stress by life, then I actually think they won't be able to cope so well. They won't develop the mechanisms through which you actually learn to cope with cruelty or hurt or exams. I mean, one of the big things is the idea that exams are a mental health challenge. Well, no, they are stressful because you have to have done some revision and done some work. So we know that, right? But everything posed like that, I think, we're not doing young people any favours at all. We're disarming them rather than helping them.
Is there not an argument, though, Claire, that if schools have a more kind of open approach to discussing mental health, that actually those kids with genuine, serious mental health conditions might be more tempted to come forward and get seen?
Well, I mean, I'm not suggesting a ban on all mention of mental health, am I? I mean, and also there's a sensitivity that you can establish amongst teachers to be aware of people and what the symptoms might be if somebody is very ill. I mean, goodness, if you're a teacher, you pick up if somebody's doing a lot of self-harming, right? Or, you know what I mean, if somebody's utterly, chronically depressed in the corner. I mean, I'm not suggesting that there's an insensitivity or that you never mention it. But I think you're underestimating what's happened. I think that the therapeutic language in education, the idea of organising schools around mental health and well-being. I mean, these are very broad categories, by the way. That has been going on for some time, and I'm suggesting that young people are not getting the help they need, but they self-diagnose. Because what happens is, you see, you end up seeing your problems in a medical way. You want a diagnosis. You then want treatment. Parents get embroiled in all this. What are you going to do for so-and-so? And you end up creating a sense of dependency amongst those young people. I suppose one of the ironies, because I know your programme has looked at this before, is that the one time that I did argue that one might want to give a bit more attention to the mental health of young people in recent times was the closing down of schools during lockdown, which I argued against and said, look, if you're going to, and actually we're going to have this on Monday with the weather, I mean, if anything's going to make you lose any sense of social normality or anything, it's going to be not being allowed to socialise at school with your friends, the panic and the fear that was generated by COVID and now by the weather. And everybody said, oh, no, we're doing that for children's safety. I mean, I actually think that will have had a detrimental impact on the psychological development of many young people. But the same people are arguing we should have therapists and counsellors everywhere, which, by the way, is not the role of the school anyway. I also want to stress that should be CAMS. There is a whole psychiatric arena that should be propped up and given more support in the health service. Schools have to predominantly educate, and this constant telling teachers that they have to be on the lookout for mental health problems, I think distracts from their core role, which doesn't mean they have to become monsters who are insensitive to any child that's miserable.
Brilliant. Well, Baroness Fox there joining us to talk about her contribution to the House of Lords debate around mental health in schools. Now, Arlene, I saw you nodding away at various points there. What did you make of Claire's argument?
Well, I think Claire has been very thoughtful about all of this. She's not saying that there aren't mental health problems with our young people. Of course there are. There always have been. And I think in the past, those weren't identified and weren't dealt with. Unfortunately, what has happened is that the pendulum has swung completely the opposite direction now, and everything is seen in the context of mental health instead of actually building up our young people in terms of resilience and well-being and using ways to tell them that, yeah, it is normal to be worried about exams and it is stressful. But, you know, there are times in our lives when you are going to have to deal with stressful situations. You find ways to get through that and you will come through it and then you'll be on the other side. So I think this idea, and you've already mentioned it, that for every ill there has to be a pill. In other words, that you have to medicate young people who come and say that they are having difficulties is wrong. And we need to find the difference so that those children who are actually really suffering from mental health difficulties are found and are helped in an appropriate way. Because I have to say, here in Northern Ireland, our mental health facilities are not up to scratch, and we need to fund them in a much better way and to help those young people through. But, you know, we're not going to help those young people by identifying a whole raft of young people as having mental health problems when actually what they're going through is actually their teenage years.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, again, I saw you nodding away. What's your stance?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a great believer that you should give as much compassion and support to people who have got genuine mental health conditions. A compassionate society would do exactly that. But, you know, grief, anger, stress, sadness, these things, disappointment, these things are actually normal, everyday human emotions. And in the life of most people, they will be, from time to time, unavoidable. And I am really concerned, actually, that every time a young person is experiencing one of those negative emotions, we're simply saying, well, check your mental health. That's a mental health issue. And it's a tough world out there. It's a tough world, and you need to develop, as a young person, the kind of resilience to be able to go forward into that tough world. And you'll go through life and you'll have setbacks and you'll have things that happen to you that cause you disappointment, and you've got to have the wherewithal to deal with that. So let's not spread the net so widely that every normal emotion is categorised as some sort of mental health condition, because I think that then becomes a real problem.
Yeah, well, send us your thoughts on GBviews at gbnews.uk, and stay with us, because coming up after the break, we're talking about grooming gangs and gender-neutral toilets, so don't go anywhere.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. An inquiry has found that more than 1,000 children have been groomed in Telford, with obvious exploitation ignored by authorities. The report found that key agencies dismissed exploitation as child prostitution and blamed the children rather than the perpetrators. They also concluded that exploitation was not investigated because of nervousness about race. Paul, this was a story that you're quite passionate about. What did you make of the findings?
Well, it's a national scandal, Deanna, and it's not the first such example we've had of this type of grooming scandal. We've had them in Rotherham, in Oldham, in Rochdale, in Bradford. And it seems to me every time that no one's willing to speak openly about the problem. No one is really willing to join the dots. I mean, in this case, in Telford, we saw 1,000 young people, children, suffer sexual abuse. Now, the media and our public institutions made so much a couple of years ago during the so-called Me Too scandal, where, if an MP dared put their hand on somebody's knee, that was seen, by the way, I'm not suggesting it's right for MPs to do that, but nonetheless, that kind of thing was seen itself as a national scandal, and reputations were destroyed. There was a huge public outcry. It was, saturation coverage in the media. And yet these scandals, where there are thousands of young people as victims, happen again and again and again. And it's almost as if we say, oh, OK, we've had this inquiry now, let's put it to one side until the next one comes along. And it just seems to me that if you're going to live in a multicultural society and you want to talk about the benefits of multiculturalism, you also need to have an honest debate and say what some of the downsides are. And the truth is, there are and have been over the years a number of men, mainly from the Muslim British Pakistani community, who have engaged in this sort of behaviour. And we need to ask serious questions. We need to have a proper post-mortem. We need probably a public inquiry into this issue. And we need to start having an honest debate about why it's happening and what the underlying reasons are. And until we have that debate, these things are just going to keep happening.
Yeah. Well, joining us now to discuss this story further is former Scotland Yard detective Peter Bleksley. Peter, what have you made of these horrific findings?
Well, I echo everything that Paul says, but I'd take this a bit further quite a bit further, because quite frankly, I'm enraged by yet another story, which is so similar to others in Rochdale and Oldham and other places. What we need is a criminal investigation into the actions of the police officers and possibly the council workers who decided these cases were not going to be investigated. Those people should be prosecuted for misconduct in public office, in my opinion. Then, if we see those people who did not carry out their duty properly and diligently, if we see them getting convicted of that crime and possibly being sent to jail, that will send out a very loud and clear message that you can't look the other way, you have to do your job.
And Peter, are there widespread calls for that level of investigation? Do you think it's likely?
Well, as we speak, I think I'm the only voice that is saying this, unfortunately. But perhaps some of your viewers and listeners might agree with me, and they might want to write to their MPs and otherwise campaign, because there were clearly crimes committed by those people who didn't do anything. You see, when it comes to misconduct in public office, with that particular offence, doing nothing can be a crime. So in cases where police officers did nothing with regards to these allegations, they should be investigated. And if the evidence can be gathered, charge them. Because I am sick to the back teeth of hearing these statements from police officers, senior police officers, where they say, oh yes, we have reflected, lessons have been learned, and all those hollow words that I hear time and time again. They count for nothing. Let's have some action. Let's have those perpetrators in front of a court.
Well, very clear direction there from you, Peter. Thank you for your time. And this is such a sort of harrowing story. We will come back to it in future weeks. But that was Peter Blexley there joining us, former Scotland Yard detective, to talk about the findings of the Telford report. Now, a survey conducted by the campaign group Sex Matters has concluded that single-sex facilities, such as toilets, changing rooms and hospital wards, are vital when it comes to safety, privacy and dignity of both sexes. Maya Forstater, the executive director of the campaign group, said the research provides evidence of the strength of feeling and the voices of thousands of ordinary people who are being ignored. Well, we're joined now by the campaign group's director of advocacy and the author of Trans: When Ideology Meets Reality, Helen Joyce. Helen, tell us a little bit about the findings of your report.
Hi, thanks for having me on. So we already knew from polls that were weighted to the population that most people agree that single sex should mean single sex and not single gender or single gender identity, and that people think that in private spaces, toilets, changing rooms, dormitories, sleeper trains, and also in specialist places like rape crisis centres and prisons, women and men need to be able to be separate when they're vulnerable, when they're undressed, when they're sleeping, in particular for women. But what hasn't happened is to go beyond that and to say to people who value single-sex spaces, why? So that's what we did. We asked people in February to get onto us and answer a bunch of questions about single-sex spaces and say, what do you value about them? Because this is a human rights issue. It's not a popularity issue. If 60% of people are okay with single-sex spaces and 40% aren't, we still have to have single-sex spaces for the 40%. And it's often talked about as if it's something that the majority can overrule the minority. Well, already we know that it's the majority want them. We wanted to know why. And what women told us was really heartrending, how they couldn't be included in public life if they weren't able to get access to single-sex spaces, not just for the obvious things like getting changed in a swimming pool, but Muslim women need them to adjust their hijab. People who are rape victims, previous rape victims, may feel traumatised if they have to share with men in enclosed spaces. And so lots and lots and lots of women said that the trend for gender-neutral or mixed-sex spaces meant they had to stay home. Over and over again, we heard the sentence, I never went back.
Paul?
Helen, people on the other side of the argument would often use the argument, look, aren't you just dismissing every man as a potential predator? And if there are men out there who are determined to engage in abusive behaviour, then they would just go into a women-only toilet anyway and do it. If they have that intent, they're not going to be put off by a sign on the door. How would you respond to those arguments?
Well, it's the famous not all men argument, isn't it? I'm not saying all men, I'm saying some men. Almost all people who commit violent crimes, and in particular sexual crimes, are men, and overwhelmingly women are the victims. Men are also stronger than women, so can usually overpower a woman if they want. And it's about norms. If you've got clearly signed single-sex spaces and everyone understands that only female people go into this room, an obviously male person going in is automatically a suspicious person. So people said things like, when I was a teenager, a drunk man followed me into the toilets at a bar, but the bouncer came straight in afterwards and told him to leave. In mixed-sex spaces, no one would do that. We really heard some stories that I would very much like the sort of people who say, oh, this is scaremongering, this is just old-fashioned dinosaurs talking about, purity politics. I'd very much like them to read some of these stories and then look me in the eye and say it again.
And Helen, what about for trans people who clearly are a very small number in terms of kind of UK population? But it can be quite difficult, can't it, for a trans person to decide which bathroom to use? And particularly for trans women, if they were to use a male bathroom because biologically were born male, can be victims of kind of assault or abuse there, can't they?
So by saying that, you're acknowledging my point, which is that men are a danger. So it can't be both true that trans women should be allowed into women's bathrooms because men are a danger, and it's completely fine to allow men into women's bathrooms. These two things are just mutually incompatible. I agree that trans people need special provision. They are a tiny minority of the population, but they are a vulnerable minority. So yes, we can just have third spaces for them. I think that's the only way to do it. You add a single facility with a lockable door, floor to ceiling door. But in general, you need separate spaces for men and women, and no male people, however they identify, should not be going into female-only spaces. As soon as male people come into female spaces, they are no longer female spaces. So I don't actually think it's hard. I think it's clear. If you're male, don't go into female spaces.
Okay, well, very clear there from Helen Joyce. Helen, thank you for your time this morning. And do send us your thoughts and your views on views at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry for most of us, and it should stay warm in the late evening sunshine. Let's take a look at the details. It's a dry end to the day in southwest England with plenty of sunshine. It will be slightly breezier around the coast, but feeling warm inland. Southeast England will hold on to plenty of sunshine this evening. It will feel warm late into the evening with light winds, staying dry also into Wales to end the day with lots of very late sunshine, a thin layer of cloud that will turn the sunshine hazy at times.